Hi guys. Oh, it's so warm down here. It's unreal. I am so sorry that I won't be with you today, but I did record this for you. I think you'll really enjoy this one. This one is called Spring Callas. I really love the techniques that are involved in this. It's a very subtle background, and then we're going to use a texture medium to make these flowers pop. And then, of course, we're going to add a little bling to this. So we're going to bring in a stencil and some dimensional adhesive to create this really pretty broken harlequin effect using a gold foil. So I think you're really going to love this one. So today I am actually Zooming with the Forest City Decorative Artists. I've been really excited about this one. We're doing one of my newest pieces. It is called the Lighthouse Tavern. I love this piece. So that's why I'm not with you today, and I had to record this. So I wanted to make sure that you guys had something to paint today. So this is your video. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. So enjoy Spring Callas. So this is the piece you're going to create. I just love this. There's something really velvety and delicate about calla lilies. They're such an elegant looking flower. So simple and so pretty. And they are not as difficult to paint as you might think. So we're going to use a little bit of texture medium to raise the edges of these flowers just a little bit. It gives them a nice depth and nice texture. And then we're going to use a stenciling technique, a relief stenciling technique, to create these raised harlequin. And then we're going to use that to create this broken gold leaf effect. I think it's so pretty, and it adds just a touch more elegance to this. So 2 stencils for this piece. One is this elegant brocade and arabesque pattern. You can find this on CD Wood, Chris Hoy's website at cdwood.com. She has beautiful collage stencils, and quite honestly, any one of those combination background stencils will work very well for this. It's just for a little movement in the background. So pattern isn't really a big deal. I just happen to be quite partial to this arabesque pattern that's in there. So that's the background. For the foreground, we are using M235, which is that 1/2 inch harlequin or a 1/2 inch diamond. Of course, you can use any stencil. It doesn't have to be one of mine. You could use a check stencil and turn it on its point so that the diamonds form. You can use almost anything to create this broken look in there. I think you'll really enjoy the technique. It's quite simple and adds a really nice flash of elegance to this piece. So here we go. The background for this one is done with a color called Aqua Sky. It's a little more blue than Bahama Blue, a little less green. So it's a great color, and it covers beautifully. So we're going to use that color and just slap it on fairly generously. Don't skimp on it. And then make sure you bring it around the edges as well. I'm using a 1-inch fugly brush for this, which is a Dynasty and Caustic oval, a 1-inch oval. It's one of my favorite brushes, especially for base coating. I'm working on an 8x8 canvas. You can get these at Michael's. You can get them at almost any art supply store. It's a fairly common size, so it's not a difficult one to find. So here we've got a little bit of that Aqua Sky. And then I'm going to pick up a small amount of warm white, and we're just going to sort of slap a little of that warm white in there just to create this nice soft variation, so you don't have the solid color everywhere. So a little bit of that, and then just continue to base coat your surface this way. It makes for a soft and subtle background. I didn't want a solid color, primarily because I find it's a little flat. Even with the stenciling on, it just turns a little flat. So nice variations in tone all over the whole background. Easy peasy, slap it. It doesn't have to be neat and tidy. We've got quite a bit yet to go on this. So if there's spots that you miss, don't overthink it. It doesn't really matter at this point. So a little bit more in that corner. Now, one of the things that I've noticed about canvas, and it's a common issue, is this. It's a little stretched. So I'm going to put my color on, and again, I'm going to bring in a little bit of warm white. Just slip slap a little in so that we get some variation. No real rhyme or reason to the application. We just want to get a little variation, just like that. Looks a little soft and cloudy. And then before this dries, you're going to grab a little bit of margarita. And you're going to decide which corner your flowers are going to come from. So I really like that this is kind of bright on that side. So I'm going to bring my dirty brush and I'm going to pick up a little bit of margarita. And I'm going to just pop a little of that into this corner. Don't overthink it. It's just sort of a slip slap, little bit of that green right there. And all I'm really doing is just bringing a little bit of that green to the background where that floral will be positioned. Just like that. And we're going to let this dry. Fortunately, I have a heat gun. Now, this canvas is a little bit loose, and it will tighten a little bit as the paint dries on it. However, I'm going to show you a little trick. Anytime that you have a canvas that is not cooperating with you, you can spray the back of it with a little bit of warm water. Just room temperature is fine. And then you can let it dry that way, or you can force it using a hairdryer, or in this case, a heat gun. So I'm going to dry this really quick. That's the nice thing about a heat gun. It does dry the paint fairly quick. You just don't want to hold that there too long. Not too bad at all. So I'm going to check that. Now the paint did tighten it a little, but I want to tighten it a little further. So I've got a bottle of, this is just a little bit of distilled water. I keep a little spritzer handy full of distilled water for a variety of uses, but it works well for this one. So I'm going to mist the back of the canvas where the raw canvas is with a little bit of water, and you want it fairly wet. And then I'm going to take my heat gun again and dry this from the back. It is fairly wet, so I'm going to dry that really well. And what happens is the cotton duck or the cotton canvas is going to shrink as it dries, and it'll pull the canvas a little tighter so that you have a nice uniform surface to work on. And it really doesn't take that long to do this, but it is worth it in the end to do this. It gives you a nice, almost a drum-like feel. Now these canvases come with fixers as well. These little wooden pieces that you see, packaged wooden pieces, those can be positioned into corners as well to help tighten this, prevent stretching, etc. But usually this method is sufficient for our purposes. Doesn't take very long to dry it. Now it's still a little damp in places, but look at this. Considerably tighter. Now it has that drum feel to it. So we'll give that a couple more seconds to dry, and then we're going to stencil our background. This is a fairly elegant piece, and I really love the blue in the background. I think it gives a nice springy feel to everything. And I think we are done. There we go. So we've got a nice, much tighter canvas now than it was. So here's our lower right corner. This is the corner where I've put all of that margarita, so that when I position this piece like so, that green is basically in behind this floral. That's going to work very neatly in our favor. So our next trick is to add a stencil detail to this piece, just like so. I'm going to tape this in place so that it doesn't shift. It's so frustrating to be working on a piece and then have the stencil suddenly move for no apparent reason. So I'm going to stencil it in place like so, little piece of painter's tape. And I'm going to use, I've got a 1 inch or a 3/4 inch Dynasty Stencil Pro stencil brush and a little bit of warm white. And I'm going to load that up well. Now, the stencil detail for this does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be fully opaque. We just want to get some pattern back there. So if you're finding that you're not getting a really great look, don't worry about it being too perfect. It's only going to make the next step more difficult if everything is absolutely fully opaque, when it doesn't really need to be. Now, I'm kind of skipping over this lower corner because I have all that green in there. I'm more interested in this area here. So it doesn't, you don't have to get it everywhere. Nor does it have to be perfect. So there we go. So I think I'm satisfied with that. I got a couple of little spots there, but I think I'm content. This is a nice stencil. This one is from, as I said, it's just a nice collage stencil from Chris Hoy. I love some of the stencils she's got on there. I'm a fan. I love Chris Hoy's stuff. So she comes up with some great stencils. So we're going to dry this. Love it. Love it. And then we're going to mute this. So I'm going to take that 1 inch oval that I was using for my background, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of that aqua sky. And I'm going to thin it quite a bit. I want to get this very watery. And we're going to put a wash of this color over top of that stenciling. I think it's a little strong yet. There we go. And I'm paying more attention to where the stenciling is than anything else. And I'm just putting a wash of that aqua sky over top of that stenciling, just to soften it. I don't want it to have a really harsh look. I want this to have that sort of faded and off in the distance look. So I'm going to dry that, and then it'll be time to transfer our line drawings to our canvas. It's such a pretty background. And again, you can make this as subtle as you want. So if you feel this is still a little busy for you, you can apply another coat of that wash. It's not going to hurt. And I kind of like that it has this sort of distressed and faded look, which is what we want. And there we go. So we have the bulk of our background done. And this is where we're going to work from this point. So I'm going to position my line drawing right there. I want the leaves, the tips of these leaves, to just touch the edge of the canvas. So when it comes to positioning, I don't want it dead center. I want to bring it over to the right. From a composition standpoint, if I put it dead center, you just look at the painting. If I pull it off to the right, just a little bit, doesn't have to be a lot. See, there's the edge of our canvas right there. That little bit has you moving your eye around the surface, so it draws the eye throughout the canvas. It's not located dead center. I very rarely position anything dead center in a painting. I find that it's a very static place to put things. Even when you look at portraits where it's just an individual, there is a composition aspect to that. They're very rarely dead center. The face will be turned slightly or the head tilted, and the image will be just slightly off center. It makes for a much more pleasing composition when it comes to the overall design of something. And having this just off to the right slightly leaves a little visual space, a little negative space here where there's nothing, and then it draws the eye down with that stenciling, so it just softens things really nicely. Just makes the viewing of it nice. So I'm going to position my graphite matte side down. You want that graphite side down. And I'm going to use a red gel pen to do my tracing. I like the red gel pen simply because I can see where I've been. And it helps you prevent missing things. Here we go. Now, firm pressure, but not so hard that you're pushing right through the paper and into the canvas, but firm enough that it's transferring. And then we have those wonderful leaves back there. This piece has a very minimal palette. Start to finish, I'm only using 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 colors total. And 2 of them are white. So you don't have to have a ton of colors to do this piece. Primarily because I have a tendency to move colors around. I like seeing colors move. So the flowers have some of that blue that's in the background. And some of the green that's in the leaves is in the flowers. I like that continuity, being able to carry colors throughout a piece. And it does make a big difference in the end. It helps maintain a lot of balance in the piece when you move colors around from one place to another within the same piece of artwork. And it lends it some continuity. It's like putting reflected color on from, a little bit of red in the leaves from the red flowers that you've painted in. That little bit of reflection makes such a difference. And it works the same in this. Instead of bringing white into the flowers, you bring, or into the leaves and the other elements within it, you bring a little of those other elements into the flowers. It's important to keep things in balance that way. Not to mention, it makes it fun and interesting. Now, one color I did bring into this that seemed a bit odd at first was the tea berry. I'm going to bring a little tea berry into this. I was going to have a tiny bit of orange in there, and then that would be it. But I needed to move that color around, so we're going to bring it into the flowers as well. Yikes! Didn't transfer very well. Missed one. Jeez Louise. Let's see if I can do this right this time. Wow, I can't believe I just missed that entirely. Okay, it's faint, but it's there. So put my graphite away and my line drawing because we're done with that. Try to keep my painting area clear. So I know that you can't really see this, but I can. So I think we'll be okay. So the color surrounding this piece for that background, we're going to use a little bit of this. This is deep midnight blue. And this color, I think when I was designing this piece, I had an idea that I needed to bring into this a little more depth. And so I wanted a fairly dark color. You could do this with Payne's Gray too, but I'm going to use a small amount of this deep midnight blue in that background right there. It's very watery. Very, very watery. I did not want this color full strength. But this color is, you could float this if you wanted to. I'm just using a round to sort of pull that color out a little bit. There we go. So this is the color I'm going to use to deepen those shadows back there. This is the base for our shading under our flowers. This is what's going to give us that nice deep dark shadow back there with very little effort. See? I love how this looks when you do this. So we have a little bit right there. So pretty. And it's not that there's a ton of blue. There we go. So that deep blue, sorry, I kind of drifted off there for a second. That deep blue is going to build our shadows in here. Remember, we've got a darker corner down here, so we're going to bring in a little of that blue like that. It's loose and it's very thin. It doesn't need to be perfect. I think my shadow here got a little dark, but that's okay. Here we go. La la la. I like having those darker shadows established right off the bat. So I'm going to let that dry. And then we're going to use a little bit of plantation pine to really bring this out. Here we go. So there is our first dark shadow. So now we're going to use a little bit of plantation pine. And I'm going to heavily thin this. Lots and lots of water. Because we can always make it darker, but we can't make it lighter. So I'm going to bring in that plantation pine right over top of that blue. Just like that. Nicely thinned. such a pretty color. I love the depth that this bit of blue underneath the green just keeps this green a little cooler. And then we can water that down. I love that we can water this down. Look at that. Now I'm using a round, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't use an angle or a flat to put these colors in, but I like the round because I can move the color around. Heavily thinned. There we go. Look at that. I love the depth that this creates. Don't forget that little gap in there. I forgot it the first time around and it drove me crazy till I found it again. There we go. And then you can just let that color run out. There's nothing wrong with bringing that color all the way out and then let it run out. But I love that that dark blue just gives this green a little more depth. So pretty. Pretty, pretty. Look at that. So there is our shadow. We've established all of that darkness in behind those flowers. Now our highlight, our light source is coming from the left-hand side, from the upper left. So it's down and away, which means that these shadows on the lower right are going to be darker. So you can manipulate this back here all you want, quite honestly. You can make them darker, 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 however you want. But that's the nice part about working with this, is because we're working with very thin layers of color, we can manipulate them a lot longer and adjust them as we go. So I'm going to dry this and then we're going to start the fun part. I love the leaves in this piece. And the color that we're using for the greenery in this is called Avocado Toast. It's a much lighter value than the lush green. So it gives us a more, a lighter start to begin with. And then adding a little bit of margarita to that and the plantation pine, we get all kinds of different values. And it gives us that lush color that we've got in this first one. So my bottle is almost empty. So I don't have a lot left, but I can get through this. There we go. Avocado Toast, if you're looking for it, such a pretty color. It's a new one for 2025. And if you need the paint number, it's DA430. I love this color. It manages to be very springy without being overly yellow, and I think that appeals to me a lot. As much as I love a good green, I find some of them are just a bit much. So you're going to base all of these leaves with this lovely avocado toast. One coat is all you need. Be generous with it. Just fill in those spaces. Look how lovely. Easy peasy. The nice part, I think, about painting it with this particular style is it is very loose. It's not as heavily structured as perhaps traditional decorative painting is. Some people really struggle with the loosey-goosey. I love the loosey-goosey. I think the more you try it, the more you paint with it, the better you get at it. And I think it frees you up a lot of the time. It allows you to perhaps live with what would be considered a mistake in decorative painting. You can live with some of those little wobbles and bobbles and those little imperfections. And once you get the shading and the highlighting right, the rest sort of falls into place. And I think that this is just such a pretty color combination. When I was laying it out, I wanted something that was springy and fresh looking, but I didn't want the traditional, bright greens. I wanted something a little subdued. And I think that this avocado toast was the perfect green for this. I just wanted to stay away from those high yellow greens. And I think this worked. I think it worked very well. So I'm just tackling the leaves at this point. I'm not worrying about the stems, because we're going to come back to those shortly. There's some nifty little flip overs in this piece where at the edges of some of these leaves. And the nice part is that we're going to be able to just use that base color to create those without having to add anything else to this. So there is our avocado toast. There we go. And now we're going to have to come to these calla lilies. We're going to use a little bit of warm white. We're going to heavily thin this. We don't want these fully opaque. There's no need for them to be fully opaque at this point. And we're going to put a coat of that very pretty warm white on our flowers, just like so. And you're going to leave a little space between the various segments of these flowers. So even around the flower and under that turnover at the edge of the petals, you're going to leave a little narrow space, just so that we don't have to go back in and trace everything back on. And this is a loose wash. It doesn't have to be perfect, just for the floral. And then we're going to do the same thing for the rest of the calla lily. And when you get to that little stamen that's sticking up, just paint directly around it, like so. Don't forget to leave that little space right there so that you're not tracing everything again. So there we have just a little bit of warm white. You're going to do that to all three of these calla lilies. This is going to make your life a little bit simpler by doing it this way, because the next step tends to put down a lot of opaque color, and you can kind of get lost if you don't have something to designate where everything is. So it's just easier to do a thin layer of white, just like so. And then you can come back in with the texture mediums, which we're going to do shortly. And it'll make your life a whole lot simpler. calla lilies are just such an elegant, elegant flower. Popular in wedding bouquets, also popular in funeral arrangements and things like that. There's something elegant and soulful and just beautiful about them. And so they are very popular for certain applications. So look at that. Warm white is such a lovely color for these flowers. There we go. This is referred to as the arum lily. I've painted them quite frequently. I do love them. I have a thing for white flowers. White orchids in particular, white calla lilies, daisies. They tend to... I didn't realize it until I started painting that I'm kind of obsessed with white flowers. I tend to gravitate towards them. I think it's because they pick up all of the colors from around them. Calla lilies have, touches of green from the stem, touches of the other colors within them reflected on them. So there's something about them that is very interesting. So the arum lily, very, very pretty. And surprisingly, not difficult to paint. Et voila. So we have a white base down for our lilies. I'm going to dry this. What the hell? I think my heat gun just quit. First of all, it was never that loud. And it's blowing nothing but cold air. Wow. That kind of scared me. I wasn't expecting that. And I really didn't want it to be that loud. Oh my Lord, it's louder than my hairdryer. So I'm going to force this a little bit. So we have our lilies. I'm going to turn my palette here and grab a palette knife. And we're going to be using a little bit of modeling paste. And this is the one that I'm using. I'm using the DecoWorks Media Modeling Paste. I love this one because it's very creamy and it's very lightweight. And we only need about a teaspoon. And even that's probably more than we need, but I think it'll be easier to mix this. So about a teaspoon worth of that modeling paste. And then we're going to use a little bit of titanium white and warm white. So I'm going to mix my modeling paste with a little bit of warm white. And I like about 1:1. So 1 teaspoon of warm white and 1 teaspoon of modeling paste. And you're going to mix the two together to make a very thick paint. Now I have a filbert wave, small filbert wave, like a size 4 filbert wave in the supply list, in the brush list. And that's only because these are smaller than I would ordinarily do. But all it is a filbert with a serrated edge. So I've got a little teeny tiny one, and we're going to pick up a little bit of that white paint, just a little gob, like that. And we're going to go to the edge of our calla lily, and we're going to push to the edge and then pull back towards the center like that. And what it creates is a little bit of a lifted edge and then some lovely stria that fall back into the throat of the calla lily. And you're going to do that following the shape of the flower like so. Now when you get to this little turn over here, you don't want to pull it down into the throat. You want to push it to the edge and then pull it almost like a comma stroke so that that curve goes to the edge, inside edge. So it implies that it travels down the other side. And those little brush marks that remain are going to create that sort of velvety texture of the flower. And they can be subtle or they can be aggressive. How much you put on is entirely up to you. But follow the shape of the petal all the way around. Now the direction of that curve is going to change as you move around to the edge of the flower, like that. So that when you come to this side, they're going to go in the opposite direction. So push to the edge of the petal, and they're going to curve down and in, like that. So now when you look at your flower, all of these curves come down into the center of the flower. Just like that. And then just continue move that on to the next one. So again, that little push puts the texture medium right at the edge of the petal and allows those brush marks to fall down into the throat of the flower. That little push, it is not a gob, like a huge gob of paint. It's just a little ridge that creates at the edge, but it helps give that flower a lot more dimension than you expect. And again, as you come towards that side, that direction is going to soften and change. Like so. And if any time you feel like you're losing the smoothness or the brush marks, just rinse out your brush and start again. Oops, I've got way too much time to clean my brush. Rinse. Pick up a little texture, push it to the edge, and then on that little flip over at that edge, don't forget to turn your brush. That little ridge makes such a difference to the texture of these flowers. And you can do the same thing on this little flip over as well. So take a little time to practice it, getting that little texture in there. If you find at any time that you're not getting the movement, and the direction is more important than having it perfect. You can see how that directionality of those strokes makes all the difference. And this technique has some nice drama to it that is surprisingly subtle. It gives the flowers lots of texture, gives the flowers elevation so they pop off of that background, but it also gives them such beautiful definition at the edges of the petal, and it changes the overall texture of the flower. So instead of having it look like the canvas, it has a different texture altogether from the canvas, so that the two actually work really nicely together. Now, if you find that some of your edges aren't as crisp as you'd like, don't be afraid to come back in and put a little more on. It won't hurt it. Just keep it light. Don't worry about getting 10 tons of material on there. Isn't going to help. But nice light little strokes with texture medium. And see how it's maintained those various shapes of the flowers. And then you come over to this side. Callas are so pretty. And they come in just incredible selection of colors. There's these beautiful red ones and these gorgeous, almost neon colored orange Callas. And then there's these incredible white. The common white ones. We'll call them common because those are the ones we see the most, but to me, these ones are just the most elegant flower. And I love the texture that brings. Now, we've got a little flip here. And I want to bring that texture in. There we go. I almost missed it. So I'm going to push a little texture out there, and then I'm going to bring it back down. So there we have all of that wonderful, those little brush marks, those tiny strokes coming down towards the throat of the flower is going to give us so much more than what you expect. So that's the hardest part of this piece. It's the most difficult part, is getting that texture onto the upper edges of the flower, and it's going to serve you very well once you do. So I'm going to grab, I had a small round. I'm going to grab my round. I want to bring in a little bit of warm white here. Finish my little flip over there. And here, so pretty. I'm terrified to use my heat gun. Obviously, the power required to run the element in this is now being transferred to the fan. So it's loud. There, I put I hit the mute button so you're not deafened by that. But I think that's toast and I'm going to stop using it now. So this, while this is still drying, all of that texture medium, we're going to come down here and tackle our leaves. Now, I've got one coat of that avocado toast in there, but now we have to start adding some shadows to our leaves, and we're going to do that with plantation pine. It's I think plantation pine is one of my favorite shading colors for any green. It has this really nice transparent and very lush feel to it. It is dark without being overbearing, but it is a beautiful, beautiful green. So I'm going to shade into those center veins like that, and down into those deeper areas of the leaves. And I'm going to do that on all of them. Now there is a ripple on this leaf that goes like that. So instead of trying to repaint it in with a different color, I'm going to use my plantation pine to shade it in. So there's the little flip. I've just come away from the edge and put a float in there to create that little fold. And then I'm going to float some of those lines in. And it's very rough, but it's there. And I'm going to deepen this because it's not dark enough. Here we go. That's better. Wasn't quite there. And then we have a dark shadow back here. Now this is this leaf back here. So it's going to be fairly crowded. It's also not going to get a ton of light. So we're going to put a fairly generous shadow back there. Same with that. Now remember, these floats are very, very loose. We're not looking for perfection. So there, I've got that little shadow in. Take a little care at the edge of this flower. There we go. And then we're going to come down to this one here. There's another shadow back here, which is this leaf here. And I'm separating those two leaves. Nice little float down the middle, just to create a center vein. And then this leaf down here, we're going to do the same thing to this that we did to this one over here. We're going to use that shadow to create that flip over at the edge of this leaf. Just like that. So look at those. Those leaves are taking shape very nicely. So I'm going to let those dry for a moment. And I'm going to grab my round brush and a little bit of that avocado toast. And this is where I can paint in my stems. Right there. And I like to bring a little of that avocado toast just up a bit on the belly of that flower. Just a little. There we go. And then paint in our stem on that one in the back. Again, I'm going to bring a little bit of that avocado toast up onto the belly. Just a little. There we go. So now we have stems. I love the looseness of this. And I know that scares decorative painters because we're so used to working meticulously to float, shade, and highlight things. So it is a little daunting when things are very loosey-goosey. So we're going to, on these leaves, oh my goodness, there we go. On these leaves, we're going to take a little bit of that thinned plantation pine and we're going to sort of stroke in. Oh, I think it's not thin enough. We're going to sort of stroke in some veined areas. Don't overthink this. It's just going to look very heavily messy. Little comma strokes. That's essentially what we're doing. We're putting in comma strokes. But those comma strokes represent the vein lines in these leaves. Just like that. They don't have to be perfect. So there we've got some nifty comma strokes in there. And I know that this looks a little different. But these areas in here are going to be very, very dark. In behind these flowers. And there's really no way to do that back there without just painting them in. So I'm going to clean that up a little bit while I'm in there. Little one. So now we've got these very loose comma strokes in there. Kind of scary, but they're not neat and tidy. They are not perfect. So we've got a little bit of margarita, which is that high yellow green. I love this. Margarita is one of my favorite greens. This is the color that I like using for highlighting. We're going to take a little bit of margarita off to the side, and I'm going to put a little bit of warm white in it. Not to make it thin. I want to make it quite a bit lighter. There we go. Quite a bit lighter. And then we're going to thin that out. Lots of water. Just like we did with the plantation pine. And then this color is going in between those dark ones. just like that. This is going to help us create sort of that variegated look. That's what I've been trying to create in here, sort of this variegated look. And I'm just using a much lighter green to do it. And it is going to look a little sloppy for a bit. And that's okay. There is an ugly stage to this. And this is it. So there is our variegated. I know. Stay with me. I promise it's going to look fine when we're done. So there is our variegated leaves. Still got a ways to go, but they need to dry. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that lighter value down the left side of the stems. Just like that. This is our highlight color on our stems. And then on the other side, I'm going to stroke in with a little bit of plantation pine. Again, I'm using a thinned plantation pine to do my shading. And don't be afraid to let those colors blend. They'll be fine. So we're going to let all of that dry. And I just realized there's a spot here that I missed when I was doing the washes of plantation pine. I forgot. There's a spot right here that I forgot. There we go. So we're going to give that a second to dry. We are going to solidify all of this. I promise you it's going to look just fine. So while we're waiting, I think our texture medium is now dry. So I'm going to rinse out my brush. And we're going to come back to our warm white. And we're going to begin base coating this, putting that final base coat down. And this is where our warm white is going to be very important. We want this to be quite opaque. We want nice clean lines. Paint the space following the shape of the space so that any brush marks that remain will be part of the finished piece. And then you can clean up edges on these flowers, putting your bit of warm white over your texture medium. And this is going to give us our beautiful opaque white flowers with those nice crisp edges. I love this part. This gives you those really crisp details at the edges of those petals. And these flowers really start to look like calla lily. Pretty, pretty. So all of these little details like this over here start to make sense. Love it, love it, love it. I love Callas. Very pretty. So take a little time to really apply a nice base coat to these flowers so that you get those crisp, clean edges, because that's going to be important in the next couple of steps, so that we have these nice, these beautiful, beautiful clean edges on these flowers. Part of what makes calla lily such an elegant flower is that really crisp, clean, and that beautiful white, and those edges. There's something heavily structured about them, and they're just so beautiful. Oops. And even with this, fairly opaque base coat that we're putting in, that green that we have right at the bottom is going to translate into these flowers. Ta-da. And they're fun to paint. Easy peasy. Easy, easy, easy. So it may take a couple of coats to get these flowers fully opaque, and that's all right. A little bit of warm white, a little bit of Joe Sonia. We'll have beautiful calla lilies. Easy. They are not, however, all that easy to grow, so I admire someone who can grow these. I had some in my garden. They only lasted 2 seasons. They just did not like the climate, I don't think. But, and I had pretty, sort of a coral colored ones. They were just beautiful. But they did not like the climate, so I only got them 2 seasons, and then they packed it in, unfortunately. There we go. There we go. So my heat gun makes drying this a little problematic. So we're going to give that a few minutes to dry. And while that's drying, I think my leaves are ready. So I'm going to grab my angled shader and a little bit of plantation pine, and we're going to deepen that first set of shadings. Just like so. And yes, it's going to subdue that, all those comma strokes that we put in, and that's what we want. So here comes that center vein. Very nice. Come down here. Nice deep dark shadow at the base. Nice little line up the center vein, like so. Gotta keep those shadows nice and crisp. There we go. It helps keep these leaves separated, helps provide all kinds of depth, to keep those flowers nice and tight. Look at this. I love when you start deepening shadows. I love what it does for everything else. Just brings everything else forward. So you look at your leaves here. I'm going to get my shadow in down that center vein. And then we're going to put another shadow right there to help brighten that, deepen that shadow along the edge of that little flip over. I'm going to do the same thing here. So when you do that, that shadow does two things. It softens and mutes those lighter strokes and sort of helps keep them under control so that they don't just look like big light green strokes on the leaf. They begin to look like part of the leaf. So those shadings, when you put them in, make such a difference. So now all of those strokes are a little less obvious. Whew, that thing is so loud. Gonna have to get a new one, obviously. So I've got a nice small angled shader, and we're going to bring that lovely green in again. I'm going to bring a little of that margarita down the highlight side of the leaves and a little at the outer edge. So that little bit of that lighter green helps mute that a little further and softens things. So now those leaves don't look so patchy and so heavy. And then at the edge of those little flip overs, we need a highlight there as well, just to make those turnovers in the petal, those little flip overs in the leaves look a little less stagnant or static, I think is the word I'm looking for. I want them to pop out a little bit, and it needs a little highlight. So I'm highlighting with a little bit of that margarita. I've heavily thinned it. I've got a fair amount of water in my brush, and I wanted that green to be somewhat thin so that it would have that muting effect on the green, on the leaves, to soften things. It mutes things down a little bit, makes them look a little less harsh. Really makes these leaves softer and more elegant. And then I'm going to show you a little trick to really make these leaves look special. I'm going to use that margarita. I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white, and I'm going to make a very light, very, very light green. And I'm going to bring a little of that to the edge of those turnovers in the petals. It's almost white, almost. I'm going to bring a little of that to the upper edges and to that center vein on all of these. Just a little. I don't want a ton of it on there. Just enough to change the value of that green. And it gives those leaves such a pretty look. And I'm going to bring that up here. Like I said, it's almost white. Almost, but not quite. And it tends to give the leaves sort of a muted look, almost almost a frosted appearance without taking away all of the heat of that green. And that is muy importante. There we go. I love that. And then while you're at it, you can come in, bring a little of that white to the stems. Look at that. I love that it just makes these stems look so soft. So rinse out your brush. Pick up a little bit of plantation pine. I love this color. And I'm going to deepen the shadow on the back side of these stems. Just a little. There we go. And this one. There we are. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white. Fair amount of water. I don't want this really strong. And I'm going to brighten the highlights on my stems. Just a little stroke of that white. Do the same thing to the leaves in a few spots. That little bit of white. It's heavily thin, so it's not super strong. Just bring it into some of the tips and edges of the leaves. And it just makes everything look soft. Marvelous. So I'm going to let that dry. We are going to tone these with a float of asphaltum. And it's going to look really pretty. But in the meantime, I want to get one more coat of this warm white onto a couple of areas on this calla lily that's just not quite opaque enough. There we go. That's a little better. Wanted to clean these up a little. One more coat of white. It's surprising how quickly... Ooh, I managed to pick up a little margarita, but that's all right. There we go. Like so. Oh, my stars. Okay. So while that's drying, we're going to grab a little bit of baby duck. I love this color. Baby duck is just, I think it's become my favorite yellow. I've used it so much since they brought this color out. And my bottle is almost empty. So we're going to use baby duck to fill in this stamen here. This little bit in the center of the flower. It is a beautiful opaque yellow. It is just gorgeous for this. Even over top of that blue, it covers very nicely. And I'm pretty generous with it because I kind of like the texture that it creates. So I'm being pretty generous with that color. Look at that. So that has to dry. So I'm going to mute you again. So that's much better. If I mute it, then you guys don't get deafened by that thing. Good heavens. So pretty. I love the whole look of this thing. There's just something about this piece. So our little baby duck areas here are going to get shaded, but we need to shade the inside of our flowers. And we're going to do that with that aqua sky. Now, I think you could do this easily with Bahama Blue as well, but I like the aqua sky. It ties the flowers to the background. And I'm going to bring a little float of that down into the throat of our calla lilies. That's why I wasn't too worried about, that line on the edge of the calla lily, because, where it dips over. Leaving that little space was okay because we're going to bring some of that blue back in anyway. So here we go. A little bit of that aqua sky down into the throat of our calla lily. And the same here. Now I've thinned this out with a little bit of water or Joe Sonia's, and I'm bringing it up. You see how I'm following the shape of that line, that little float in there. I bring it up till it meets that stamen, down into that deep area, and then I'm following the curve. See that curve? Follow that curve. So it gives you that nice shape inside the flower. I also love that you can, really draw that color out. There is a little bit of, I won't call it a seam, but there is a little divot. And I like to bring that float down the center of the leaf or the petal. I get stuck on the leaf thing. Here we go. And we're going to do the same thing there. So that helps shape these flowers on the inside. Now we have to shape the outside. Don't worry if you feel you're getting a lot of blue, because there is a lot of blue in these flowers. We're going to float underneath, right in there, underneath that turnover, and along this line here where there's that fold in the flower. All with that aqua sky. That is our dominant color in this piece. I know you'd think it would be the white, but it's not. So here we go. And then don't forget to put a float up the back side of the flower. This is the area of, oh, too much. This is the area of the flower that is getting the least amount of light. I had to pull some color off there. There we go. So now we've got all of that shading in, and that has shaped our flower quite nicely. So now I'm coming back to, remember that little mixture that we made with that margarita? I want to bring a little of this into the back side of this flower. So I've got a little of that thinned margarita with the warm white. Just a little bit. I'm going to bring a little more. I want to bring a little of that into that blue area, because this leaf is back there. So it's reflecting a little green in, and we're going to bring a little of it along the base of that flower. And right here, I want a little of that green coming up onto the white. And the same here. That little bit of green comes from the stems. There's a nice little glow down there. So a little bit back there. I like a little bit in here too. So I'm going to mute you. Good Lord. Thing is so loud. So we have this wonderful color. This is tea berry. This is another new color from last year. I love this tone. It is so pretty. It is not a coral, not a red. It's, I don't know what to call it. It is just such a lush and beautiful color. And that's going to be our shading color for the center of our flowers. So I've picked up a little bit of tea berry, and we're going to put that float up the back side of our centers, a little bit across the bottom. It creates just the most gorgeous orange when you put it with baby duck. So look, we've got these beautiful centers. And then while you have that color out, we're going to pick up a little bit more water. And we're going to bring a little bit of that tea berry into the belly of the flower. I want a little of that gorgeous corally pink just down at the bottom of the flower. That color helps sort of create this almost translucent effect because we're bringing it from that stamen down into the throat or into the center of the flower, and it just helps create this really pretty translucent effect, as if that color is reflecting down through the bottom of the flower. And it doesn't take much. You just need a tiny bit. It's very pretty. Super simple. Look at that. Little blush, very heavily thinned, little blush of color. So I'm going to clean out my palette because we are done with this. Oops. And I'm going to put out some titanium white and some asphaltum. Titanium white, and then of course, my favorite all-time color, asphaltum. You know I love my asphaltum. And I'm going to rinse out my brush. And we're going to bring heavily thinned asphaltum, lots of water, a little bit of paint. And this is where we're going to tone the interior of these lilies. And tone underneath the petals. Wherever there is blue, we're going to put a float of heavily thinned asphaltum. Heavily thinned. This color serves to give these flowers shape. It doesn't kill these colors, but it tones them. So there's my asphaltum. Wherever there is that blue, you can bring that color in. If it sneaks up onto the white, that's okay, but just mute it a little bit with your fingertips to soften that. Look at that. How pretty. I love asphaltum, and I love what it does for blues. I love what it does for most colors. So nice little float back there. We're going to come in here. Look at that. Defines everything really nicely. Hard to believe, but we are almost done. Little float of asphaltum over top of those blues. It just helps tone everything. It also helps make these flowers really soft. So I'm going to bring a little float of asphaltum straight across, like that, so that now our little stamen is tucked in behind that petal. Look at that. Don't forget little shadow where those petals fold over each other. Look at that. Comme ça. Easy peasy. So now we have this lovely definition. Look at our flowers. That little bit of asphaltum just does the prettiest things for blue. So now we've got some shading in there. Little asphaltum to deepen everything. We can take that asphaltum down onto the leaves and into those dark areas. Deepen shadows. Just like that. Come in the back, deepen those shadows. Asphaltum is a wonderful toning color. I use it for all kinds of things. I love it for deepening corners like this. Deepening shadows wherever you feel they need it. It just does wonderful things. You can make things deeper and darker and more toned without using a black. It keeps things nice and warm, keeps colors defined. I love the fact that I can shade with this color without killing the other colors. So look at that. We've got these wonderful shadows. So we still have some titanium white on our plate. And I'm going to pick up a little bit with my 1/2 inch angled shader. I want to make sure my brush is well rinsed. And I'm going to pick up warm white, or titanium white, sorry. And we are going to float the edges up against those darker shadows, like so. And we're going to float the outer edges for a highlight, like that. Now, using that titanium white to float those areas is going to soften all of those other boundaries so that we get really nice muted color. Look at that. So now that velvety look of the flowers really comes out. And having that bright highlight at the edge gives these flowers crisp definition, softens shadows, really gives our flowers beautiful detail. Gorgeous edges. And then you can brighten a highlight on the belly of these flowers with a little float, just a little float of titanium white. Look at that. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Nice and soft. That float of titanium white helps define the edges of the flowers. Gives you beautiful detail. Gorgeous highlights. Also softens and mutes some of the shadows where they needed to be muted. So you get this really pretty velvety look to the flowers. And I love a little float of that on the belly. Just gives our flowers a nice soft look. Now for the center of these flowers, on that stamen, all you need is a stylus or a liner. You're going to pick up a little titanium white and you're just going to give it a few little white dots on the highlight side, which is on the yellow side of this. Doesn't have to be directly on it. Just a few little white dots gives it a nice little texture, but it also highlights the center of the flower very nicely. And you have pretty calla lilies. So I'm going to take a liner brush. I've got a nice little script liner here somewhere. And find one that works. I'm going to use my signature brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of titanium white, and I'm going to add a nice little detail to these petals. I'm just going to clean up that point on the blossoms. I really like to see this one quite crisp. I just think it works so much nicer if they're nice and clean, just so that we've got nice sharp points on those flowers. And I'm going to mute you again quickly. And our next step for this, we are going to add some texture to our background. We're going to do that with a little bit of this. This is Mix and Relief from Pebeo. This is an adhesive, and it is quite thick. This is designed for gold foil or for gold leaf. And I'm going to put about a teaspoon or so on my palette. I know you can't see that, but there it is. It's about a teaspoon worth of this adhesive. And we have a palette knife. And the other thing I'm going to use is this. This is a gold foil. This one is Deco Foil from Thermoweb. This is one of my favorites. I like the way this one works. You can use gold leaf as well. And I actually really like this particular foil for a couple of reasons. One, affordability, and two, it's so easy to use, and it's just a super product. So I'm going to use, I'm going to find I have a diamond stencil here somewhere, I think. I'm going to look for it. Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to look through my little stencils here, see if I have one. Yes, I do. Look at this. What do you know? So I have a small Harlequin stencil. This one is a 1/2 inch Harlequin. And I'm going to tape this in place so it doesn't move, because if it moves, it's going to be very frustrating. So I'm going to use my palette knife, and we're going to create a relief using a little bit of that adhesive. So I've taped my stencil in place. I did that for a reason. I do not want this to move. So I'm going to literally butter this over my stencil. And I'm also going to let this run out. I am trying to create sort of a broken look. I don't want this to be perfect. So if you have a close look, you can see that I've got adhesive in some, and some I've missed. And I'm going to carefully remove my stencil, and then I'm going to turn it around and line it up again, comme ça. And then I'm just going to do a couple of pieces like that. And then remove the stencil again. Now I managed to get it in a few places I didn't want it, but that's okay. So I'm going to take that and pull that excess off. There we go. The nice part about this technique is if you've got a little adhesive left over, you could put a little chatter. You can clean your brush off or your palette knife off on your surface. Now, this has to dry for about 15 to 20 minutes. It depends on the humidity, of course, but this has to dry. When it dries completely, it is transparent, completely transparent. And this is going to take longer than we have. So I'm going to demonstrate how this is done. So once your adhesive is completely dry, you're going to lay the foil silver side or matte side down, depending on what brand you've got. This one is the Deco foil. It'll have a silver side. That you're going to lay over the adhesive, and then you're going to burnish it. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can do it with a brush handle, or you can use the tips of your fingers face down, and you rub gently but firmly, and it will stick. There's still adhesive showing on this one. That's why I chose this. So you just burnish it well, and then you peel it back. You can hear that it's still sticking, and removing adhesive. So this is what you would get. It will literally take the gold off the foil, and the gold remains on the adhesive. Simple. So super easy way to do a gold leaf effect. Having that broken effect where you don't quite have enough, or you've got open areas or skipped areas, helps create this really heavily distressed appearance. Kind of adds to the elegance of this. So once this is completely dry, you can add your gold leaf to it. And then once that's done, then you can float all the way around the outside edge with that deep midnight blue that we used for shading in behind the flowers. And then you can finish that off with a float of asphaltum and then sign your piece. It is such a fun floral to do. It is super simple. Lots of fun techniques. I love the texture mediums in the flowers. I just think it gives the flowers that extra little bit of oomph. I love the simplicity of these stroked in leaves. I love the texture for this relief stencil with that little bit of gold foil or gold leaf on top of it. It just makes for such a fun and easy and elegant piece to celebrate the Easter season. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this piece. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the prettiest pieces I've done recently. So this is Spring Callas. I hope you have fun with this. And I am looking forward to having you all back again next Saturday, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Come and join me on Tracy Moreau Live or on my YouTube channel. I'm really looking forward to painting with you.